Turn and face the strange changes. Don't wanna be a richer man. Turn and face the strange changes. It's gonna have to be a different man. Now may change me, but I can't trace.
We're ready. The first slide, as you can see, looks like a piece off of the website. And for those of you who would like to see the politics of the state and some national politics on a regular basis, The Buzz, Cerulli Associates, The Buzz is the website. And I put that up about 3 weeks ago, just sort of describing to my 4,000 or 5,000 friends what was going to happen up here. And as you can see, it's we're in probably the most divided moment that we have been in our country for many, many years. And we're heading, at least in this state and in a number of states, obviously a very important midterm election. So we're taking all of that polarization and difference and these arguments we're having, and we're about to put it into our first midterm election, which will be incredibly critical, obviously, for the presidency and what's going on in Washington. But it's going to be very, very important to us because we're going to be having our first primary election in both parties. For about 20 years, the Democrats haven't had a gubernatorial primary. Also, this will be the first time that theoretically unaffiliated could vote, and they may in our primary. And then obviously we'll be affected by whatever happens in Washington for our congressional races. The state has been on a incredible roll. Let's see, am I advancing? Ta-da. There you go. The state has been on an incredible roll. The growth hasn't been uniform. If you've seen the Denver Post stories, you know that the High Plains and to some extent Pueblo in southern Colorado and a few other places have not benefited from this incredible expansion we've been on. And for those of us who have been in the middle of the expansion, we're probably complaining about traffic and density, but it has been amazing. And then I mentioned that political transition and a lot of challenges. We have been either second or seventh in the last 10 years in terms of growth compared to all the other states. Dealing with water, as you know, we're going to not quite double, but nearly double by 2050. The economy has been rated number 1 or number 2 for some time. We got a governor in Hickenlooper 7 years ago who was really dedicated to economic development, to reducing regulations, and has, in general, he and the legislature have received kudos for doing a lot of that, and we have had a very strong economy in a good part of the state. And we're the second best educated. We have good schools ourselves, but mainly it's all these millennials coming here with great educations on their own. And then we're in this transition and challenge I mentioned to you. By and large, we have been, we're sort of a middling state. We sort of stay in the middle of politics. Once in a while, we'll go to the left. Once in a while, we'll go to the right. Sometimes we'll just be generally confused. But by and large, we've been pretty responsible and moving down the center of our politics. We have our level of gridlock, but periodically we break out and decide a few things. But we have very serious budget constraints, as you know. We have a constitutional gridlock. We've inherited just a lot of amendments that conflict with each other. We're reaching capacity in transportation, water, education, and health. And all 4 of those are at some point have either just been considered as statewide ballot initiatives to put a lot more money on the table, or are in consideration. Transportation in particular is trying to think through, can we go next? And I think that's to the discussion we had yesterday in the interim committee and the discussions we're having in general, at some point we're going to start having to think seriously as to what the state contribution could be to create some bonding capacity for everyone. We have some anti-movements out there periodically. At the moment, I would say maybe there's still a nascent hydrocarbon anti-movement out there and may appear this year, but we've had some tremendous ones. And finally, we have some huge out-of-state influences besides the governor, or pardon me, the president. But we also have very, very wealthy individuals who periodically, billionaires who periodically decide, geez, I think we'll experiment in Colorado. How about if we don't sponsor a ballot initiative, or how about if we don't give several millions of dollars to some candidate? And as you know, many of the gubernatorial candidates already have independent expenditure committees. But by and large, as I say, our politics has been in the middle. So what this transition is about is, are we going to move one way or the other? Is there a possibility we will become a very left-leaning state for 2 to 4 or 8 years? Or is it likely that we will stay sort of centered the way we have been? Is there some possibility of moving to the right? I think there's less of a possibility of that, but it's certainly a possibility. One thing that's driving all of the politics worldwide is the fact that there's this incredible collapse of trust in government. The business that many of us are in, or that we consult with or serve, is just not trusted by a lot of people. It tends to be more trusted at the local level, a little less trusted at the state level, and not at all trusted by Washington. This refers to the federal government. There's that great slide there from Vietnam and Watergate. Then there's that Reagan bump. Then it drops down again into kind of the end of the Clinton and the beginning of the Bush. Then it spikes up. That spike there is 9/11. We really decided we liked government, and we need government, and for a little moment there we trusted government. And then, as you can see, between later Bush, that would be Katrina and the war in Iraq, and then all of Obama, and now into Trump, we have been sliding down. And that forms the backdrop of my second slide here, and that's called polarization. And that is that we have never been more polarized. See that line of the difference from 35% to 71%. In other words, over that period of time, from Lyndon Johnson and Jack Kennedy to today, we are totally accumulated in our partisan preference or opposition to whoever the president is. And it is overwhelming. And you heard Bennett yesterday. He's talking about what's in that box right there. What he's worried about is the fact that we have so attacked and denigrated the media over the past 30 years, whether it's coming from the right in terms of Rush Limbaugh, or it's coming from the left, which believes that these big media companies are controlled by capitalists. That our media now has no credibility, so that back in Reagan's period, the parties believed the only difference between the parties in terms of thinking that the media has an important watchdog role was 6%, and today it's 47%. That is to say that people who like Trump are less inclined to support the media, feeling that it's not fair to him, and Democrats are much more inclined to think we need the media. But we've become very, very polarized on that issue. Also. And finally, what this leads to, this loss of trust and polarization, is that we no longer have much confidence in our institutions. Now, you notice we have a lot of military people at the top of our government at the moment. Well, besides Trump liking them, the public likes them. That's one group that the public actually likes and trusts. But as you go down that, and notice those are sort of the authoritarian groups up there, the police and the military. And as you go down, get down to the bottom, there's used car dealers, funeral directors, and Congress. And then just above them, look what's just barely above them, newspapers, television. The criminal justice system, well, we trust the police, we don't trust the criminal or don't have confidence in the criminal justice system. But the point is that it is very hard to govern today. It is very hard to be part of any kind of establishment because the public has lost so much confidence and is so critical. Let me take us through Washington for a moment. This was off of my several of my blogs, and I put the pictures together. And as the president has said on numerous occasions with different phraseology, which he always tweets, what chaos. And the answer is that there's just a general sense that the government hasn't, for these last, I think, 215 days, been running quite as smooth as it could, particularly in terms of the White House. And the White House, Trump understands that. He uses it at a theater. That's the Resolute desk up there. That's the guys there on the 28th of January. That was the Saturday after the inaugural. They're there talking to Putin on the phone. He's theoretically on the phone with Putin. They had just issued the travel ban, and all hell was breaking loose in every airport in the country. The only person, or the only two people now left, are the only two people you can't fire. Everybody else has been fired, as you know. That's the famous Mooch picture with Mr. Priebus. They were captured in the White House just before. This is Mooch had already done his interesting interview with I think what was it, the New Yorker, where he pretty much condemned most of the staff, including Mr. Priebus, and Mr. Priebus was shortly out. What that sort of demonstrates that there's a lot of tension in that White House, and also that there are power bases, there are power nodes, which may still be fighting. It's difficult to say. And then finally, there is the picture of General Kelly shaking hands. Did we lose our slides? There's a picture of General Kelly shaking hands there. God bless that guy. Is this tough work or what? Because not only does he have that White House to bring together, which I assume he will. He's a hierarchical military guy with a lot of personal charisma and authority, but he's also dealing with Donald Trump, who is difficult to corral. But that's the White House. Then there's this incredible vote. Do you recognize Mr. McCain? He's right there walking out, and he's going down. Do you see Mr. McConnell with his arms crossed just looking at him? And then if you look carefully, you can see Mr. Schumer, and he was about to wave to everybody on his side of the aisle saying, don't clap, because they were kind of thrilled. McConnell had just defeated health care, and as you can see, the implications of that was a pretty significant defeat for both for the White House, and it hasn't quite gone over it, and obviously for Congress, although as you know, they're thinking they're going to move on. It is when Bennett was out here, while we didn't ask the question, the main question he gets is health care in these. That's the first question and one of the repeated questions, and that's especially true of Republicans. And the reason is not only is it an important issue for almost everybody, and it's particularly, it's sort of on the agenda of progressive that go to a lot of these town hall meetings, but the Republican problem with it is that the Republican Party, the base of the party, really wants repeal. They want that repeal. They agree with the president. Go back, get back together and just repeal that thing. And interestingly, almost nobody, including the Republican base, is all that attracted by all the replacements. And so that's the difficulty that Cory Gardner is in. On the one hand, he knows he has to repeal it and believes it himself. And on the other hand, it's very, very difficult. As you know, they made 3 tries, 3 different bills that they brought up, and they couldn't get the votes to do it. So this will be around for a while. This is tough. Finally, I would end up with that it also is now leading today. What's the story in almost all the newspapers today? That story is the war between the White House and the Republican Party, particularly in the Senate. The president was just in Arizona attacking the junior senator in Arizona, Mr. Flake. I assume Mr. Flake will lose because the president's about to give him a primary. Well, then he has only 51 votes, not 52 votes. Does that look a little self-defeating? But he was just in Nevada, and he gave that senator some difficulties, not necessarily in this trip, but in previous exchanges. And so there is a war going on, and obviously, as you know, Mr. McConnell and the president haven't talked in some time, except for apparently a very, very difficult phone conversation of a couple of weeks ago. And then finally, on the presidency, it was the tragedy in Charlottesville. That happened on the 12th. The president then released various statements and then had his very famous press conference on the 15th. And as you can see from my little polling box down there, 62% of the people, and I've seen various figures, 50 some odd percent, et cetera, that by and large, most of us, particularly us Northerners and Westerners, we haven't thought about Civil War statues a great deal. And our initial reaction of the public is, well, why would you take them out? But in fact, if a community comes to a decision and they want to remove them, obviously they can and they do. But the public doesn't quite understand all that. But what they did understand was the performance of the president in the press conference, which, as you know, was very hot and was more like a color commentator as opposed to a sovereign expressing the tragedy and some unity, which he ended up doing a little bit later at the beginning of the Afghan speech. They also felt that about 60% of the folks in a brand new poll that came out today said that he thought that he was contributing to dividing the country. But if there is one thing that people do agree with, it is stop tweeting. But by and large, as you know, he strongly believes in it, and he will continue doing that. So that's the backdrop into what I call the dashboard, and this is something I have presented to you before, but this is sort of the snapshot of what's going on in Washington politics, and it is the view of political scientists and us, those of us who follow politics closely, that presidential approval is probably the variable that we look at as to how the midterm election is going to turn out. And when a president is below 50%, much less below 40%, and as you can see, I think he's at 38 there, that's a problem. And you'll notice right in the middle of that little box there, it says generic congressional. That's the question we ask. Who will you vote for, a Republican or a Democrat? We don't put any name into it. And just generically, the public at the moment is leaning 9 points Democratic, which is leading Nancy Pelosi to believe, by the way, that's not Mr. Schumer. That's my secretary got the wrong picture there. That's Mr. Reid, but that leaves Nancy Pelosi hopeful that she's going to find 24 votes, 25 new votes, 25 additional members, 24 actually, to give her the chair back, to give her that gavel back, to make her the Speaker of the House. If I was Mr. Trump, I would be concerned about that, because impeachment begins in the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Conyers will be the head of the Judiciary Committee, doesn't like Mr. Trump, so he ought to be conscious of what's going to happen in this election. And at the moment, right now, I don't know if Mr. Buck's staff is here, but they told me that he has 5 people signing up to run against him. And that's possibly based on the rumor that he may run for the Attorney Generalship. But I also think it's the fact that Ms. Pelosi, trolling the country, looking for 24 seats, is putting people in every seat, including 3 right now in Mr. Kaufman's. And as you know, the record of Mr. Kaufman is to win. He almost always wins. And could the Democrats take the Senate? We didn't expect it. As a matter of fact, we thought they were going to lose seats in the Senate this year because they are defending so many seats. And in point of fact, if you start giving away Arizona and you give away Nevada, that is to say, you start this battle in your own party, and it's not so much even Trump doing it, it's Trump supporters who are doing it. Right now, for example, he hasn't said much about the governor of Virginia, but the governor of Virginia, Mr. Gillespie, the Republican, is losing in all the polls overwhelmingly because Trump forces do not feel, they feel he's part of the establishment, the Republican establishment, and they are standing back. They are opposing him right now, and he'll lose, very likely, unless something changes very quickly. You've been following Colorado, and in my view, it's moved a little bit. It's moved maybe a couple of points to the left. I think it's still very competitive. But I think which was kind of confirmed by the Clinton win here, and actually at the end of that, it was about 4.8% for Clinton. So it was a decent win here. I'm going to show you in a moment where it came from. It was overwhelmingly out of the metro Denver area and overwhelmingly out of Denver itself, but nonetheless, it moved just a little bit to the left. But yet, if you look at all the data that we look at, all the indicators, we are still pretty balanced in terms of our registration, in terms of our ideology, in terms of our religiosity, et cetera, et cetera. You go down all of those indicators and look at the behavior. In point of fact, Corey won by 2-3 points. Mike Kaufman, unbelievable. At the very moment Hillary Clinton is winning that district by 9 points, he wins against Morgan Carroll by 8. That is to say, a 17% swing. Some people voting ideology and voting sort of their party preference, whereas he winning it on his reputation, his campaigning skills, his just connection with those voters. And Morgan Carroll was, I think most people felt, a well-funded professional candidate. She did her job, but lost overwhelmingly. Yet he has 3 folks out there running today, going to that theory I have that the Democrats are very, very hopeful that they can turn this around. And what's going on here in terms of moving the state is this picture. That data there. Look at Denver. That is a 182,000 vote edge coming out of Denver. In other words, Miss Clinton got 182,000 extra votes. That's more than she won overall. But yet, and then if you look at where she won overall, she won by about, 30,000 votes in Arapahoe, 20 some odd thousand votes in Jefferson. The only county she lost was Douglas by about 20,000 votes. In other words, the metro area, the growth in the metro area, and just some developments in the metro area have moved a bit to the left. And that's what's dominating things. In other words, Trump ran behind Romney last time in the metro area. He ran well outstate. He carried Pueblo by 600 votes. He found pockets of support out there. Notice my little bullet there. He carried the outstate areas, carried most counties, and the outstate areas by 53%. The minor problem is that if you carry everything but the metro area by 53%, you lose because the metro area is 56% of the state. So that's where the real muscle is. 66% of her vote, 2/3 of her vote came from the Denver metro area, and that's what makes it such a powerful area. Denver's really had a tremendous recovery, and I assume it'll dissipate, and those other metro counties, other areas in the Front Range, and other parts of the state will, over years, get more political power. But at the moment, the power is there. So when you start thinking about the governor's race, you start thinking of, particularly among the Democratic primary, there are 2 candidates or there are actually 3 candidates, maybe 4 candidates from Denver, but there are 2 main candidates from Denver, Johnston and Kennedy. And are they going to split that vote, helping Mr. Polis, who has Boulder and maybe Larimer and some other areas that he's represented, Summit and Eagle, etc. Who can say? I put this, you've probably seen this if you've watched my presentations before. What I'm mainly saying here is that we periodically have these disruptive elections. That's what 1972 and 74 were. That was the Watergate year. That's where we got Tim Wirth and Gary Hart, Dick Lamb, and they came in and really a new generation, anti-war, pro-environmentalism, changed the tenor and the direction of this state for a while. Republicans still had a good base here, particularly in the legislature, constitutional offices for the most part, and they came back gangbusters in the 90s with the Tabor Amendment and simply really dominating the state in a lot of ways. The Democrats still had the governorship with Mr. Romer, but it was a good Republican era. Owens came in, and the high point of Republicans' control was 2002. They had just about everything, both Senate seats and Congress overwhelmingly. And then how quickly it reverses. We had Ritter in 2006, but in 2008 we had the president. He won the state by 8 points, and the state overwhelmingly goes Democratic. And so we cycle through, and at the moment we are now in kind of a balance. We're very divided. One senator in each party, the governor, a moderate Democrat, about to go out, so we're going to have a pretty fierce contest there. Legislature divided, and our congressional delegation leaning one to the Republicans, Miss Clinton winning it. So that, as I say, we cycle through, but we can have very disruptive elections. Thinking about then our congressional race, that chart underneath there shows you that it was in the president's first term can be a very difficult term. Notice Reagan, he lost 26 seats. The Democrats had so many seats, it didn't It just enriched them some. Then Gingrich turns this around under Clinton's first term, picks up 54 seats, and becomes the Speaker of the House. Newt Gingrich in 1994. Then Ms. Pelosi takes out Mr. Hastert in Bush's second term. The second midterm in 06, right after Katrina, and the war is not going very well. And then Mr. Boehner very quickly comes back, winning 63 seats in 2010. What was 2010? That was the first midterm after Obama came in. Remember, 09, look at my line at the beginning there. It says, doesn't this recess feel a lot more like 09? I should have said 09, and the birth of the Tea Party. In other words, Obama just came in, and if you remember that first recess, all those poor Republicans came back here, and the Tea Party showed up, and the Democrats mostly, and the Tea Party was beginning to form. The Democrats, the Republicans then took both the gubernatorial races that are coming up right now, Virginia and New Jersey. That's where Chris Christie came from in the 09 election. And Obamacare was trudging along there, and Republicans were really angry about it. So look at that last line there. That's what we're expecting in terms of the possibility of this surge for the Democrats. Will that happen? It certainly may not. In other words, the power of the Democrats may sort of dissipate at some point at the border, or it may just affect the federal elections and not state elections. But there is certainly a possibility that it'll affect the state elections. Bennett didn't mention it, but you remember he said he had been to 2 town hall meetings in Durango. Well, one of them was with Cory Gardner. And that one, it was just a Donnybrook of everybody asking Cory Gardner questions about health care. And he got through it, but nonetheless, the two of them were, Hickenlooper was there too. And Hickenlooper and Bennett were just sort of sitting there, and all hell was breaking loose for Gardner. Because this reminds you of that recess in 09 when the Republicans came back in that one. There's our governor's race. It is going to be a barn burner, very good for consultants. I noticed one of my little box over there on the right side, primaries in both parties. The last primary in the Democratic Party was Feely versus Shetler, about a zillion years ago it feels like, but it was in 98. And it probably contributed to her losing, but in a very, very close race. The second point I make is look how close many of those races are. The Shetler-Owens race was a point or two, while Hickenlooper won this last election. He didn't exactly knock it out of the ballpark with Beaupre. It was pretty close. Even when the Republican Party completely fell apart with Tancredo and Mays, he only got 51%. So again, sort of my suggestion here is that if the Republicans come up with a decent nominee and don't kill themselves in their primary, and the Democrats have a tough, expensive primary, or maybe come up with a weak general election candidate, Republican could absolutely win the governorship, and I do expect it to be competitive. There's my $25 million figure. In other words, Mr. Polis may spend $25 million himself, but he'll for certain spend 10. He spent 5 winning the congressional seat against a Miss Fitzgerald about 10 years ago. He'll spend whatever it takes, in my opinion, which is why Mr. Perlmutter is sort of, kind of going back to be a congressman, I guess. Because I think he recognized how difficult it would be for a non-wealthy individual who had to depend on contributions to win this. You'll notice many of these candidates already have independent PACs. So there's the Democratic field there. As I mentioned to you, I think Johnson, Kennedy, and Polis are the leads. But Donna Lynn, if she gets in the race and could find money in a constituency, is a very credible candidate. And I just saw a little debate up in Breckenridge or heard about and read about with Noah Ginsburg. And, he had his positions. I don't think he'll find much support out there. And then the Republican race is wide open. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 leading candidates. Mr. Bruckner's probably at the top of it. Ms. Kaufman hasn't decided what to do yet. I don't think Graham will get in. Victor Mitchell, well, the key of Victor Mitchell is $3 million. He's already put it in, hired a very good pollster, and he's off to the races. He's sending brochures. I talked to a couple of Republicans here that had gotten brochures. There's Mr. Romney's, I forget, cousin, nephew, something or other, Doug Robinson, and then Walker hasn't figured out what he's doing yet, but he's organizing a independent political act. He's not organizing, but an independent political action committee is organizing, and Mr. Watson is a Trump person. So there you can see kind of what's going to happen in this election. And finally, you notice my 2 little points over on the again on the right side. Independents can vote. Will they? History would tell you no, that unless they are motivated by some surge of ideological interest or an incredibly charismatic candidate like Bernie Sanders. Independents came out and voted for Bernie Sanders. They voted for Donald Trump in many of the open primaries around the country. Or you spend maybe $1 zillion getting them out there. By and large, they don't tend to turn out, but they could. And then finally, my point is that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump will have an impact on the governor's race, just because within those primaries, how you stand on those 2 individuals will be a factor. Somebody will say, I am really with the president, and some other people will be taking some distance. Some people will really say, I'm a Bernie Sanders person, and others will say, no, I don't. And Bernie Sanders sort of sets the mark in the Democratic Party. Are you for single payer? Are you absolutely against fracking? So you can kind of go down the criteria. Are you for sanctuary cities, 100%, et cetera, et cetera? Those are key issues within the litmus test of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Let me back up here. There. So what are our options? I would say the full Democratic option there, as you can see, under Governor Polis. Hang on, everybody. That will be exciting. A split scenario, and I think that's a possibility. A Republican governor. They hold the Senate, and there is no way they're going to take the House, in my opinion. And we must probably have 10 lobbyists here, and you check with them. The likelihood that the Republicans take the House, very remote. So that's a possibility. And then these are a couple of variations on it. There's a Democratic governor and a Republican Senate. And as a matter of fact, I think that's a pretty a likely scenario. That would be essentially what we have today. And then finally, a Republican governor with the Democrats taking the Senate and holding the House. So those are, in my view, the differences out there, and every one of them will have policy differences because the politicians that are running today are going to dominate this are different than Mr. Hickenlooper and different than much of the legislature we have today. And so let me bring up water. The first piece is for those of you who weren't out with a pond or having a drink yesterday afternoon, Doug presented to the interim committee the data that's on the left there, and that's sort of the data from you. 260 of you responded to an online poll, and the question was, if you were to prioritize the issues that the interim committee is giving some thought to, what would be your priorities? And the answers were funding, project identification, implementation, permitting process. I mean, these are the basics that you, as water leaders, think that the interim committee should think about, and Doug presented it to them yesterday. And then a year ago, standing up here, I presented a statewide voter poll, and if you remember the data that came out of that, expedite permitting, water conservation, new storage facilities, go out and ask for funds. And typically you ought to be able to get a third to a half of the somewhat agree, and if you did, and then in each case you would have a majority. You would love to have a majority in the very strongly urgent. We really want to do this, but let's put it this way, you have enough voter sentiment about the importance of water, which to some extent I think is highlighted in people's minds lines queued periodically because we're worried about global warming, so we think about water even more than when we have a drought at the moment. It's keeping it current in people's thinking. Water quality issues, if you remember my poll, a lot of people were more worried about water quality last summer than they were water storage. But my suggestion is that water is out there, and if we want to get something done over the next couple of years, we probably ought to move forward here. We probably now have to wait for the new governor to kind of settle in and see where they want to go in terms of doing something statewide. But obviously there's a ton of work that we can do in terms of identifying projects, keeping this process and procedure going, looking at all the options. There are just things that can be done to queue this up. For those people who have watched transportation or anything else come to the ballot, it takes time and a lot of work. I just put this slide up, which is mainly because I saw that great headline that it said, is it somewhere between 20 billion and 40 billion? Well, for those of you who have been working on projects, and I've been working with NISP now for about 12 or 13 years, the project is roughly doubled about the same time that the price of water in Northern has doubled, and for most of you over the last 15 years. In other words, what we're doing is getting more valuable. The permitting delays are adding to the cost, no doubt about it. But in point of fact, there is no doubt we have these needs. We would love to get something from Washington. I don't see that happening in the imminent, but it would be nice to get some potential support from Washington. I put my Sonnenberg quote up there and Rebecca's. She arguing essentially that what we have is a plan and a process. Let's use it. Let's keep moving forward. And Sonnenberg basically arguing, well, the legislature should be involved, but also let's get things done. Let's get things done. And I think those are both important sentiments. We're going to need both of those, and we're also going to need a governor to be very supportive. And finally, notice I put in, I sound like an accountant up there, on the one hand and on the other hand. And that's the truth. In other words, the lineage down the middle is sort of me suggesting what the conventional wisdom is in terms of my viewpoint. Colorado is still a competitive state. I think Colorado is a competitive state. I think we're going to have a competitive election. But who knows? There's a possibility that this what we're watching right now could get worse and worse and worse in terms of the Republican positioning in Washington, the divisions within their party, et cetera, et cetera. It's possible the Democrats could do something incredibly. They could nominate Nancy Pelosi for something. Don't do that, guys. Talk her into retiring. But in any event, but I believe that the conventional wisdom is going to hold up here. So I think the top position is we're going to remain competitive. Trump will be a tremendous drag, but not necessarily fatal, and especially for state constitutional offices, or not. In other words, it could be Watergate. It could be 74, in which there is just a across-the-board sweep. But I would say the conventional wisdom is that he's going to be a problem, but that the Coffins of the world will still survive, and that assuming Mr. Buck runs for his seat, he'll win, and Mr. Tipton, et cetera, et cetera. But we shall see. Independents will remain minor players in primaries or not. In other words, there's, as I say, you heard my conventional wisdom and what usually takes to stir them up and move them, but this is a new territory, and there's a lot of new people out there and a new opportunity for them to participate. Clearly, Mr. Polis is going to encourage them, and he's got the kind of money that helps encourage things. We will remain middle of the road. We'll have polarized parties, a far left and a far right party, and some interest groups, but by and large, we will maintain that balance of all those houses I had up there, all those capitals I had up there. I'm talking about maybe maintaining a couple that had divisions within the legislature, say, for example, and between the legislature and the governor. But it could be a unified democratic government or democratic government or party government, depending on which one. And finally, outside money will continue to dominate. It'll be huge. In other words, if the governor's race ends up being a $15 million race, $30 million will come from outside. 40, maybe more. but yet it'll still be decided by the politics of this state. And that's by and large what's happened with, no matter how much money came in on Cory Gardner and Udall, outside money didn't decide it. It was really that dynamic between the two of them, who got the Denver Post endorsement, et cetera, et cetera. But you could be wrong. There could be so much money sweeping in here, it simply takes over the state, and in terms of who wins this. That is a pretty exciting year and a half, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Floyd. We're about out of time, so we're going to need. So, those of you that may have questions, catch Floyd in the hallway. We want to bring up our next speaker, who some of you know. He's the Colorado State climatologist. There's a rumor out there that he may at some day retire once he's solved climate change issues. But I'm not sure we're ready for him to move on yet. So anyway, Kelly, are we ready? Okay, good. All right, please welcome our state climatologist who will need a presenter. Floyd, did you happen to walk off without the presenter? Floyd, thank you. Okay, all right. And now, our state climatologist, Nolan Duskin.
All right, let's roll. It's time to roll. First, some facts. Yes, I shaved my mustache. Yes, my hair is shorter. Yes, I have no glasses because I had cataract surgery. Yes, I forgot to pack my dress shoes. Yes, I went to Nebraska to see the solar eclipse. It was great. Yes, I am retiring tomorrow. And yes, I will still be begging for you to set up your CoCoRaHS rain gauge. And if you have not signed up yet, why the heck not? And why not today? This would be a good day for that. And by the way, the power of volunteers with a rain gauge in their backyard, and that's what you get. That's what you get. And it's wonderful. That would be El Paso County recently. It's amazing what you can do with a bunch of volunteers willing to measure and report. So please put your dot on the map. If you haven't done so, do it now. Thank you. And I was going to bring a case of rain gauges and let you fight over them, and I forgot. Actually, I ran out of time. Okay, now it's time for the data. This is what you want to be exposed to. We're going to do a quick run through what the water year is doing and where we're going to end up. This is temperature departures from average, and it has been a warm year, especially the fall. Midwinter, pretty chilly, pretty normal. And then came February and March, really warm, and then April and May, seasonally cool, comfortable. Summer, hot, and then August has been just pretty comfortably cool. Some of the coolest August weather we've had in quite a long time. Look at Denver. There actually still is a weather station in Denver, out at Denver Stapleton. The airport is no longer there, but the old weather station and where they send up the weather balloons is still there. And this is just showing you the day-by-day temperatures through the year up through last week. By comparison, look at Grand Junction. In fact, let's go back and forth. Look at Denver. Look at Grand Junction. Look at Denver. Look at Grand Junction. What have you learned there? Grand Junction's actually colder in the winter than the Front Range. People don't always realize that, but it's hotter the rest of the year. Grand Junction is more stable day to day and year to year than is Denver, which goes on bigger rides. And the extremes are a little wilder in Denver. 2017 July temperatures ended up on the warm side, as they have been most years in the last 25 years. Pretty substantially interesting there. But there have been a few cool years every now and then. August is on the way to be cool. In fact, there we were as of a week ago, with the eastern part of the state in particular, several degrees cooler than average, and pleasant and moist. And is John Stolp still in the audience? Have you had any rain down on the farm? Yes. Is a lot, like more than you ever dreamed. It won't always be that way. So how are we doing precip-wise? In fact, let's remind you again, this is a water year wrap-up. We've got another 1 month and 1 week to get through this water year. But this is where we are for the month of October. If you see red, you're looking dry. If you see blue, you're looking wet. Last October, we were dry. And in fact, the first 3 weeks of November were really dry. And we were saying, oh man, not the start of the next winter drought. Then by the end of November, things started to change. Some storms started to hit up from the southwest. December came in with pretty decent moisture, spotty but decent, and pretty good in the southwest in particular. January came in wet most everywhere except the El Paso County, South Denver metro area. And then came February where, darn it, we turned dry again and the plains were drying out. And say, oh man. And then March, holding dry on the western side, with a nice little storm there up through eastern Colorado. April, this wet pattern started showing up in the southeast part of the state already in April. It's quite impressive. And then May, and how many of you are from the North Front Range area? And what did it do in May? Snow! It was a wonderful snow, a big snow. A wet snow, a tree-breaking snow for some areas, otherwise just a water-providing snow. It was amazing how a single storm can deliver and make a big effect on an entire basin, and that one did. And then we turned right around, and the spigot shut off, and we went into a very dry June. There was enough surface water that it was looking okay, but the vegetation was on the quick dry out. We're thinking, oh no, wildfire again, not that again, I don't like that again. But then July came and the monsoon came just about on schedule, bringing moisture up from the southwest over the state, and this time really taking aim on southeast Colorado. And in fact, the month of July, in historic perspective, you see the end point there, was one of our probably 10 or 15 wettest Julys for the state as a whole, not everywhere, not up here. And then this would be for the first 10 months of the water year to date, October through July. You see who's been the wettest, the southern part of the state, especially southeast, and who's been the driest, northwest, and some spotty stuff still on the east side. That northeast part turned the corner come August. And in fact, this is no longer expressed as a percent of average. These are actual precip amounts, and there are some 8-inch precip amounts in parts of Kit Carson County, Baca County, Prowers County, and even Fremont County, east and northeast El Paso County. There's anybody from, oh man, what's the little place northeast of Colorado Springs? Beyond Falcon. Before you get to Lyman. Yeah, I think that Callahan maybe. And there's some places there that were pushing 15 inches of rain for the summer, which is a lot of rain. And furthermore, it didn't make that many floods, which is the best rain of all. And just in case I haven't reminded you, no 2 years are ever the same. No 2 years are ever going to be the same. And yet all of you water providers are supposed to provide the same. And more power to you. Keep it up. I don't know how you do it. You got my respect. Okay, let's talk about, okay. What you're looking at there would be a graph of a single weather station, Grand Lake. The middle line is the average. The top line is the wettest on record. The bottom line would be the driest year on record. And then whatever the color is that only goes through August, because I'm still colorblind, that has not changed. And I don't know, what is that color? Okay, you guys are not colorblind. That would be tracking along pretty darn near average. Excellent. How about Grand Junction? Grand Junction has actually been on a run of wet years, like one year after another, and this year has been doing good until the spring, and then it's been steadily falling behind, but surface water supplies are still good, so Grand Junction doesn't matter that much. Dry in the desert doesn't always feel that dry or that wet. Montrose had a little bump in January. Other than that, tracking pretty average. Mesa Verde had that big early winter start, and then it's been sort of dogging it along since then, falling below in the last couple months. Alamosa had one of their wettest Julys on record, believe it or not, and that launched them to a very wet year for the valley bottom. Pueblo had a really big spring and has tracked one of their wetter years on record, but then they've turned around while the rest of southeast Colorado has been getting it in August. They've been missing it. Very interesting. Oh, but today, do you know who the wettest? Quiz question. I'll give you a piece of a rain gauge if you get the right answer. Who got the most rainfall in the rain gauge this morning in Colorado? What town? I haven't heard it. It starts with R and it's got 3 letters. Rye, 1.21 inches, Pueblo 0, which is about what you'd expect. Walsh having a pretty good year, an amazing year. That would be far southeast Colorado. And that's the 4-year average. They're running over 10 inches above average over the course of the last 4 years. And if you don't remember, before that, they were running drought. Burlington, big year again, having a strong year after having had a dry fall and winter. Akron, more tracking near the long-term average. Boulder, you see the big bump in May. That was the one big storm, and then they've been falling behind. But I want to show you this graph just because it's the last chance to show this graph. And that would be the accumulated precipitation over the last 4 years. Where did that large surplus come from? 1 week in September 4 years ago. Next month, that one gets washed off this graph, and then it won't be near as interesting anymore. All right, I'm talking where the precipitation came from. Now we're going to talk about the water leaving, good old evapotranspiration. We have a weather network, COAGMET, that measures it, focuses on it. I'm going to just show you how we're doing for ET. The middle heavy line tells you what the long-term average accumulated reference, which would be well-watered alfalfa, would be, and the top line would be the driest, most high ET year, and the bottom line would be the least ET year. Out in Olathe, running pretty near average. Cortez, especially over the last few weeks, going below average. Center, San Luis Valley, going below average. Avondale, east of Pueblo, going well below average, especially they got off to a very slow start with that wet spring. Then finally we're ramping up the ET rates in July and then shut it off again in August. So a slow ET year. So less water demand than normal, especially over the course of the last 3 to 4 weeks. Idalia, northeast Colorado, really you can see it shut off. And Holyoke, not quite as dramatic. Northeast Colorado is a little drier than the rest of the state, but there it is. And then Lucerne, which is near Greeley, which was tracking much more near average until just the last few weeks. So we got the water coming in, we got the water going out. So what about your snowpack for the year? Do you remember what the year's like, or have you already forgotten? Do you remember it? This is the northwest part of the state. The Yampa right here was one of the less snowy parts of the state, actually. They had a pretty good start. They were peaking, and then the snow melt began fully a month above earlier than average. But we did get some additional moisture, and then it ended up with a decent runoff, but not an exceptional runoff. By comparison, you see some of the other recent years, and even as recently as 2015, when we thought we were in trouble, and then had that miracle May that turned things around. And there comes, that's the water year rain gauge accumulation. And you see that we had a good midwinter that really, after that shaky dry start from October into the latter portion of November with very little, then a really strong December, January, and then we started dogging it in February. and then the snow started melting and little fell in March. And then up this part of the state has not had near the summer precipitation that other parts of the state has had. And it often doesn't, which is why this can be a beautiful place in the summer, because you don't get rained on that much. Go to southwest Colorado, they had a big snow year. Even though it had almost no snow at all through just the week before Thanksgiving, then it all went like crazy. But it shut off in early March. It looked like we were going to have a remarkably early melt, but it got a boost in April, came back and ended up with a strong melt and a near normal final melt out date for this season. And there you see that the southwest part of the state has had a nice steady monsoon. No big monster rains in that July through August time period, but steady nearly daily rains until the last week and a half or so when it sort of quit. All right, Streamflow, the great integrator of all this wonderful climate information that I love to talk about. And you've given me many years of the opportunity to talk. It's been so much fun talking to some of you who are like well, I'm not going to make any engineer jokes. But thank you for tolerating 100 graphs in 15 minutes. It works for very few audiences, but it seems to work for you. There's the 2-year hydrograph, and that would be the Colorado River right there at the Utah state line. And you'll see that we had a pretty decent runoff in 2016 and came back with we were having those early bumps with those super early meltouts in March, that early March bump, then another early April bump, and said this is too early. But it waited and had a pretty normal peak on the big river, and is still flowing on either at the high end of the above average or in the low end of the much above average range right now. You go to southeast Colorado, this would be the same game for the Arkansas River. Of course, this is downstream near Los Animas, where it's not a natural mountain stream at that point. But what do you see what happened? The snowmelt season. Sometimes there is no water that makes it there or no substantial water from snowmelt. This year there was a decent snowmelt. And then look at this summer flow, really strong late summer flows, like up in the near record levels for that part of the state. So southeast Colorado is just having a banner year for water, and even the grasslands are looking good. And this is amazing after the drought that we had just a few years ago. How are we doing on reservoir storage? It's a good year. This is up out of our state on the Green River, Flaming Gorge. You'll see I think it's a dark black line that shows this year, and the colors will give you the near average, the above and the much above, and then the record high and low. They're still filling at Flaming Gorge and doing well above average for this time of year. This is at Lake Granby, which has had multiple years of fill and some spills. They've been still filling or spilling Granby a little bit just last week or maybe even this week. Quarter foot below full. That would be 3 inches, I think. And by the way, this rain gauge will hold 11.3, and if you get that much in one day, you have had a flood. This would be Blue Mesa, where they got to do a really big release to really flush the Black Canyon and they still were able to totally fill. And it's at a higher level for this point in the season than I think it's ever been before. So there'll be more opportunities ahead. McPhee got to do a big dump in May, and then still were able to successfully fill on the normal schedule. So that means water supply forecast must have been okay, accurate forecast? Okay forecast? You managed them, good enough to manage the water without messing up too badly. That's good. And then down to Navajo, where we again have gone to the above average. Each reservoir has its own quote-unquote climatology. And as practices change, here's the big guy, here's Lake Powell. And for the first time in a goodly number of years, it has ended up it's still below average for this time of year, but it's better than it has been for, I don't know, how many years? When was it last at this point in the season? 2011. Yeah, that would make sense. So, drought monitor. Remember 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, that was the big March snowstorm that bailed us out on the South Platte, not so much the rest of the state. 2014, the California drought is firmly established. Let's watch this sequence again. 2010, all life is good in Texas. 2011, life less good in Texas. Not so good in southern Colorado either, but great in northern part of the state. 2012, the drought spreads. 2013, it gets better here, but it's getting worse to our west. 2014, it's getting way worse to our west. 2015, it's getting way worse to our west. 2016, it's retreating a bit to our west. 2017 has actually been the least drought anywhere in the country since they started doing the drought monitor in 1999. However, and in May, the drought monitor authors got together for a meeting and says, we know we're going to have a drought somewhere in the country this summer because we have had a big drought in the summer in the country somewhere every year. Where's it going to be this year? Nobody knew. And there it immediately began to emerge, and they had their spring meeting in South Dakota, and it was snowing during the meeting, and then came the onset of the next drought, which has been a northern plains drought. And meanwhile, Colorado has been faring pretty good, little dry spots here and there, but for the most part, you're okay. So if you're feeling climate data hunger, we can help feed you. We've got data galore. And if some of you are on our mailing list and get our weekly updates, but if you don't and want to, get me your business card today, and I will make sure as my last thing I do at the office tomorrow, I will put you on my mailing list, and then I'll leave. And other people will send you climate information because they love it just as much as I do. And if you don't want it sent to you, you can always go visit the Climate Center website at any time. You see it there, climate.collegestate.edu. All right, where does this all fit in the big climate picture? There are a bunch of data that you average everything together for all the weather stations in the state, smooth out some of the local varieties and some of the issues with weather station changes and such, and you'll see winter, spring, summer, and fall there. Summer would be the warmest on the graph, and winter would be the coldest. Just wanted to make sure you got that seasonal stuff right. And if you go to the effort of putting a trend line in, and I don't really like trend lines because they sometimes draw all the attention to themselves, whether they deserve it or not. But the trend line, when shown, presents an upward trend for every season, winter, spring, summer, and fall. And if you put the data together in a more expanded scale, and by the way, 2012 really stood out as a warm one, especially in summer. And the last 2 years of really 2015 and 2016 have stood out as remarkably warm falls. Really warm falls. We had been having some really warm springs, and then the last few years have been much more cool to normal. Very interesting. But there, you put the seasonal together and make the annual, and you go put the whole state together, and you make this magical, meaningless number because it doesn't mean what's happening at any individual location, but it's a good index so I can give a talk like this. And you see, we've been on the warmer side most of the time now for 25 years. 2012, again, is the one that jumps up and just slapped us around, kicked us, and fortunately we've dropped off. Interestingly, we've still had 2015 and 2016 were still very warm years, but without the same water stress. Most of our hottest years historically have been hot and stinking dry, 34, 54. Some of the years there in the 70s, 74. But if you look at these recent years, 2015 and 2016, a combination of warm and wet, which is things that we haven't seen much of in historic history. The 1990s also dished out some warms and wets. Very interesting. Someday I'll figure this stuff out. Snowpack, and don't use this graph. You're not allowed to use this graph because we don't know where it came from other than the NRCS produced it, and then they've retracted it because they can't reproduce it. But it does show that there were some really, who remembers 77? There's a bunch of you in this room that don't remember 77 anymore because that was my first year on the job. It was a nasty year on the job. And then those of you from Northeast Colorado, the way they dealt with drought was they had the worst ever blizzard. Well, one of their worst ever blizzards, and it was a dirt blizzard. It was a combination. They put down a parfait, 4 inches of snow, 2 inches of soil. 4 inches of snow, 2 inches of soil. It was a bad one. It was an odd one. I was thinking we'd have a blizzard like this spring, but it didn't quite happen. And then those big years of the 80s, ups and downs. But there you see the variety that we have and why I tell you that you're never going to see a year exactly like the year you've just seen. Every year will be different. Statewide precip, you see 2002 on there. Whoa, did it stand out as an outlier? 2012 came right back. But since then, we've been doing pretty good. 13, 14, 15, 16, and 2017 is on track to end up on the wetter side of average as well. Again, the great integrator, snowpack, stream flow, everything comes together in the rivers. This is the long-term record just across the state line into eastern Utah at Cisco. And you'll see what catches your eye the most about that graph. What catches my eyes is 83, 84, 85, 86. And at the time, we didn't even know quite how unusual those years were. And then we came right back with years that weren't really severe drought years in Colorado, but they were nagging drought years, 88, 89, 90, 91. Those were fine in southwest Colorado, but they were not fine in the northern part of the state. And then we had the roller coaster ride of the 90s with generally good precip and some big runoff years. And then came the real drought that we weren't quite ready for, that started in 2000 without us quite telling, got worse in 2001 without us having any really strong clue, and then 2002 just kicked us around. And then you see that, again, the big rivers integrate and take longer to recover. While some parts of the state were much better in 2003 and 4, the big river integrator was not showing it yet until a few more wet years. So there you go. So now what? What? You want to know what's going to come next? When have I ever given you a good forecast? I've tried. Some people have said I've given them some useful information once in a while. I've really tried. I will say that, like it or not, this is in the background. CO2 is increasing. It keeps increasing. It's increasing more in these last few years than at any time. And it is not a big impact on the atmosphere, but it's a long-lasting global impact on the atmosphere. So keep that, that's why the models predict it's going to keep getting warmer and stay warmer. There's other things that go on than just that, but it is an underlying thing that you just got to keep in mind. It's not going to suddenly turn around and go back to where it was 50 years ago. So the question is, what comes next? And I put about 20, those look like question marks to me. Yep, that would be how confident I am of that future. I trust that you will continue to manage your water in a way that makes everybody pretty happy during these years ahead, but it's going to require plenty of care, thought, planning. What's my message here? Well, I'll tell you what, water supplies today are pretty darn good. Reservoirs are fantastic for this time of year. Water supplies, even in the areas of the state that haven't had extreme wet weather, are still adequate. I would say rejoice and be glad, but be ready for drought. And it will be there sooner than you may wish. And with that, I want you to know that just because the tall guy in the back won't be leading the Climate Center, we do have other people, and some of them are really smart, and some of them are pretty darn entertaining too. And we will provide all the information you need, hopefully, And if not, just bug us until we do. And thanks for all of your support over these years.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And please, one more welcome for Nolan Duskin. 30, 40 years of service. Thank you.
That doesn't happen very often in the world of climatology.
A standing ovation for Nolan. That's fantastic. Okay, we've kind of gone from improv to Jeopardy, and we've got one more last little experiment we're going to provide for you. We've got 3 different speakers. We're going to bring them up one at a time. There's this new kind of format that got started based on architects who went droning on and on and on about data. So somebody came up with the idea, somebody said, hey, let's only give them 20 slides and give them 20 seconds per slide. They're going to put them on a timer so they can't talk more than 20 seconds per slide. So the first person, when we first came up with it, thought about this, the first person to volunteer was Amy. So she's already on stage and ready to go. We're going to go from Amy then to James. James is going to tell us, we're going to get some substantive information from James about the Mexican next minute, right? And then we're going to wrap up with Paul. And so with that, this is our experiment, so bear with us. So we're ready to go with Amy. Is she ready? All right, ready, go.
Go. Thanks, everybody, for having me. I think for those of you that were here yesterday, you know that I'm with the Colorado Water Trust. We were formed in 2001 to restore flows to Colorado's rivers in need. Many people from the water community have been on my board of directors or are on my board of directors. Are you all out there? Raise your hands. Anybody? Anybody? Hi, Aaron Wilson. So we work according to a plan. Every year since inception of the organization, we've had a plan. In the early years, our plan was very proof of concept. Could we do the kinds of projects we wanted to? Over the years, we began to really start rolling. We moved kind of into a business development phase, and now we're working at scale. And so what we wanted to do today was give you a very quick rundown of some of the projects that we've been working on so you can get a flavor for our work. Our very first project was a project on Boulder Creek, a tributary to the Blue River. It's a project that was brought to us by the Mosier family. They were actually left in a will, water rights and land that were next to a wilderness area, and they sold the land to the federal government, and then they provided the water rights to the Colorado Water Trust for our very first project. We transferred those water rights into the river. They ended up in Green Mountain Reservoir. This is a photo of Boulder Creek. When they ended up in Green Mountain Reservoir, we said, how silly that they'll just end there and then not be part of our system anymore. So we remarketed the historical consumptive use to the Colorado River District. They essentially bought our historical consumptive use so they could put it in their water marketing program. This is a photograph of the project that I talked about yesterday when Travis said it started with a phone call. This is a project that is the very first of its kind in the country. It is a permanent sharing of water between irrigation and the environment. And the photo you were just looking at was the river running straight down into the diversion structure, and this is downriver from the diversion structure. We're buying water from a ditch, and we're putting the water back in this river. The reason this project was so difficult for us to figure out is we weren't sure if this idea of sharing between agriculture and the environment would work, and Travis was the perfect person to help us kind of figure that out. An essential part of our current strategic plan right now is also leverage. How do we work with others to maximize the benefit of what we do? How do we open source our software and share our projects with other people so people understand what we're doing? If you're interested in working with us in this sort of leveraged partner capacity, please come and visit with us. Another kind of tool that we use for our program is we used to call them Senate Bill 19 projects. In 2013, Gail Schwartz ran a bill to allow for someone to apply less water to their land and enroll in a program that would not penalize them in the future for having not applied that water to their land and leave the water in the river. We've put several Senate Bill 19 conservation programs on the ground, and they're married together with some help for abandonment with a different statutory tool. This is actually a photo of a diversion structure that we removed from the Poudre River. We actually took out an abandoned dam in the Poudre River. We had, under a strategic plan, we had identified a section of the Poudre as a priority we wanted to restore flow to. We began to do some outreach to the local community to understand if there was interest in and willingness to have the trust come and bring our tools to try to solve some issues on the Poudre with flow and infrastructure. We nested our diversion, this dam removal project, in with a ton of work that was being done by the city of Fort Collins. And what ultimately resulted in this project, or from this project, was that we were invited to a group called the Poudre Runs Through It. The Poudre Runs Through It is a group convened by Colorado State University's Water Institute to bring together everyone in the Poudre that cares about the river and figure out if there is a way to restore flow to the Poudre using voluntary, compensated, incentivized flow restoration. We're in the process of actually looking at something that we're calling an in-stream flow augmentation plan. Our partners include Northern, Greeley, Fort Collins. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody, but our work in the Poudre is actually at scale, and the tool that we're putting in the Poudre can be deployed in other places, so it's essentially a pilot that we're hoping to replicate. We also wanted to mention our Flowing Waters Partnership. There are lots of folks that are participating in this partnership in the room with us. This is an opportunity for us to marry together the work that we do so if you work, for example, a municipality, your constituents may actually expect you to also be really thinking about what kind of environmental projects you want in the places that you're taking water out of in order to be good stewards of the resource that is so important to providing supply. And what the Flowing Waters Partnership does is it marries together our work with anyone who uses water in the water community, who will provide funding to us for 4 years. And then we work on a communications platform to help tell your constituents about the work that we're doing, so you get to say we've invested in this organization and they've restored flow, for example, this year to the Yampa River and Steamboat. The last thing I wanted to share with you is that there is a theme going on in the water community right now. That theme seems to be retirement. Lots of people are leaving jobs that they've held for a long time. Despite the grays, I'm actually not retiring, but I am moving on from the trust. I've been at the trust for 10 years. And I'm actually running for the Colorado House of Representatives. And I knew those two things would eventually come into conflict. And so in order for me to move on, it was time for us to hire someone. So we really need your ongoing support. We really need your ongoing participation. We hope that everyone will sign up for our email newsletter and pay attention to our transition and support our new leader in this incredibly important time for our organization.
Wow. In 6 minutes and 40 seconds, Amy Beatty, the first one to ever do a Pechacucha presentation. All right, our next one, making his way to the stage, former CWCB Executive Director James Eklund. Here he goes.
Don't start it. Use it. All right. Bono, that's awesome. All right.
Hang on, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right.
Let's do this. This is going to be fun. So my name's James Eklund. I'm an attorney at Squire Patton Boggs, a global law firm in Denver. Used to be the CWCB director. And I represent you on the Colorado River still, though. So I'm here to update you on Minute 323 to the 1944 water treaty with Mexico. Minutes, what the heck's a minute? A minute is how you amend an international treaty. So we number them, and we're up to number 323 right now. I remember things in threes. I don't know about you guys, so we're going to cover this in the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right? First, good. The treaty goes, it gives Mexico 1.5 million acre feet a year. What if there's a shortage? Well, the treaty's unclear on that, when shortages occur, and it's even less clear on how much Mexico would share in that shortage. So Minute 323 will describe Mexico's share of that shortage. More on that in a minute. The bad, even though we're not forecasting, holy cow, that went too fast. You cheated me time. All right, the bad. Even though we're not forecasting a shortage in 2018, there's only a 30% chance in 2019. Our system continues to be in a long-term period of drought and decline. That's the structural deficit you hear about. Warming air temperature that you see there, whether you're conservative or liberal, means our snowpack is at risk. So the ugly, if our snowpack is at risk, then our reservoirs are at risk. If our reservoirs are at risk, then our insurance policy, Lake Powell, is at risk. If we have senior water rights that are at risk because of that, then we have our heritage at risk. And that's what makes Colorado, Colorado. So we have a zombie apocalypse, really, if that happens. How do we avoid the zombie apocalypse? We fight a two-front battle. As Coloradans, we're pretty damn good at that. Front one, to control our own destiny, we have to arm ourselves not with weapons, but with the tools of water management, reservoir management, and demand management. I'll get into that in a second. This plan with these tools allows us to keep Lake Powell healthy. Thanks to participants in the System Conservation Pilot Program that you've heard about at this conference, we are positioned to learn how to move water down to Lake Powell to avoid a crisis. Now the other one, reservoir management, is pretty simple. You take water from these buckets and put it down in Lake Powell. Front two, now the lower basin has to address its structural deficit. And they know it. They know this. They are better able to address that deficit if they can agree to share shortages. And they're better able to agree to share shortages with some signal from Mexico that they will proportionately share that pain. So we're back where we started. Minute 323 provides the measure of Mexico's commitment and certainty necessary for us to move forward on the two fronts. We, Coloradans, upper basinites, and the basin as a whole, we're better off if we act on this stuff together than separately. So to be clear, the lower basin isn't our enemy. Mexico isn't our enemy. Drier and warmer cycles that you heard about from Nolan are our enemy. Uninspired water management is our enemy. We hang together on this stuff or we hang separately. So what's in this minute? Well, there's lots here, but I'm going to give you the high points. If the reservoirs are high, then the minute talks about increased flows for Mexico beyond their 1.5 million acre feet allocation, but not more than 1.7 million acre feet at any time. If the reservoirs are low, it talks about reductions to Mexico below 1.5 million acre feet. So further, minute 323 details additional restrictions above and beyond that, or reductions that Mexico agrees to, that is contingent on the lower basin agreeing on a shortage schedule sometime in the future. Hopefully that's the near future, and that is blessed. That has to be blessed by the U.S. How do we prevent the lower basin from going it alone, adopting changes to the law of the river with their new shortage schedule without our consent? We cannot have unilateral action on this river by any basin over the objection of the other. That's the zombie apocalypse. So if Red Mountain Pass there is the treaty negotiations, unilateral action is going over the cliff. We've got to have some side rails. I don't know why we don't have side rails on Red Mountain Pass, by the way. Somebody needs to talk about that with me afterwards. But here's how we do this. All 7 states and the administration agree that we will link arms and approach the Congress seeking federal legislation that makes that the necessary and agreed upon changes to the law of the river. Upon the legislation, we trigger the U.S. IBWC Commissioner, International Boundary Water Commissioner, to notify the Mexican Commissioner that the shortages scheduled in the minute are effective. If we don't get legislation, the states commit to reconvene and figure out the path forward that prevents unilateral challenges to the law of the river. The minute does other very important things like creating an environmental pool of water with contributions from both nations. It talks about our continued efforts on salinities. David Robbins is still here. He's our state's lead on the Colorado River Salinity Control Forum. Dave Kanzer's here. They know this is very important. It's baked into the minute. There are binational conservation projects, and it goes on and on. But we're targeting late September for a signed minute and accomplishing agreements, the accompanying agreements that allow us to accomplish that. But as Colorado's water community, you should know that we have a clear path forward that protects the upper basin interests and puts us on a clear path to addressing the bad and the ugly on this hardest working of Western rivers. In closing, know that I'm your Colorado River Commissioner. I belong to you. And so I'm a 5th generation Coloradan, as most of you know, from the Western Slope. I'm raising 3 6th generation Coloradans. This is important to me, and it should be important to you. So you can contact me anytime. Here's my info with questions, requests. There's no stupid questions. Thank you very much, and I think I'm done.
Wow. Fantastic. Somebody get him an oxygen tank. Fantastic. Thanks, James. Okay, we've got one more to do, and then we're out. Our next speaker is going to be from Pueblo Water, Mr. Paul Fanning.
Oh, don't worry about it. Here we go.
Go.
I want to talk about innovations in outreach and public communication. And we call it, what do you know about H2O? With apologies to all the English teachers in the room and the ones that I had in high school with the colloquialism, what do you know about H2O? And it goes beyond the basics. We don't feel that it's important, that it's enough to just talk about the very, very simple things with our publics. You know, we have all these, we get together and we say, these issues are so complex, we can't talk about these to regular people. We go from abstract to concrete. Who can give a quick 15-second update about the Colorado Water Plan? Nobody. The gap. What does that mean to an average person? We don't know. But they do understand drought. So that goes from the abstract of the gap to the very concrete of the drought and the effects it has. So we have to talk to them about what do we do as a public utility that affects them in their lives. Public health is number one. We provide a reliable supply of healthy water. And number two is public safety. We do that by having the fire protection, also the security systems that we have that move, maintain the water security throughout our entire distribution system and our water tanks, and our crisis preparedness that we work with the other entities in our community creates a public safety issue. Economic development. We need to have a good water supply to attract more businesses to our community. We provide some incentives at our industrial parks in terms of fees and whatnot to bring them there. And also we cooperate with our planning agencies. We don't do land use, but we cooperate with our other local entities, the city, the county, and others to make sure we have that. Of course, quality of life. We all love water. We provide water for the public parks, for golf courses, the Historic Arkansas Riverwalk project. If you haven't been to Pueblo to enjoy that, we help with that. The kayak course, a chain of lakes, which is a gold medal fishery right outside of Pueblo, between Pueblo and Pueblo Dam. We help with that as well. So we need to tell people how, what we do to provide all of those benefits. We talk about where the water comes from up in the mountains and answer the question all the time. Why are they taking water out of our reservoir? Pueblo Reservoir, it's our reservoir, it's our dam. We have to explain to them that it's not. We've heard a little bit about that earlier today. It's a reclamation facility. So we get the water rights, we have to treat it. We have an awful lot of regulations that we need to meet when we're treating the water, and lots of education, ongoing education, and we get that water treated, and lots of infrastructure that's involved with that. So our customers own the system, and they need to know where the money goes. The water supply system then, to deliver that healthy, clean water, goes to the water tanks. We have almost over 600 miles of pipes. That takes a lot of maintenance, ongoing replacement, and when it breaks, it needs to be fixed. That's very complex. Big thing. And each one of these things can start a conversation with a customer. Our communication channels, we have the standard ones such as newspapers. Sadly, with Chris Woodka leaving, the Pueblo Chieftain doesn't do as good a job for us as it used to. We have our website. We have a YouTube channel where we have videos. People really respond to videos well these days. But we also know that the most powerful type of communication that we have is face-to-face communication. As some other utilities do, we have an annual mountain source of supply tour. And when we take our citizens up to see the infrastructure, talk with our staff, that is very, very powerful. And having done that for years, that creates a really strong group of people in our community that are strongest supporters. Youth education is critical. All kids study the water cycle, but what we want to tell them is, where do they fit into that water cycle? I don't see any humans in this water cycle, so we talk with kids about where they fit in there. Where does our community fit in the water cycle? And how does that all work out? What is our impact on the water world? Also, youth education, it's important. Many kids have a family member, a neighbor, or somebody else they know that works for the water department, so they have to understand that there's some really nice people. These are the people in your neighborhood, you know, sort of like Sesame Street. And they're doing really important work, and we use that also to encourage them to be involved in STEM education and activities. Of course, the water festivals are very, very powerful tools as well. Whether it's studying the underground infrastructure or playing the water rights game, yes, elementary school students can start understanding the doctrine of prior appropriation. And we can give them a nice toe-tapping tune that I wrote for them to understand that whole system all in 2 minutes. Now, what do you know about H2O? It falls freely from the sky to make our rivers flow. It quenches our thirst and makes the landscape glow. But there's so much more to know about H2O. From the top of the Rockies down the Arkansas River to Pueblo Reservoir where it's finally delivered, we share our water with all living things as it flows on down. With flowers and fishes and bears and bees, tiny paramecium and great big trees, with farmers and ranchers and the folks in other cities and towns. Now after such a long trip it might feel tired and defeated, so we take it to the Whitlock plant and healthily treat it by filtering out or chemically zapping all the things that aren't healthy to drink. And then we pump it all over our fair city to keep us all healthy and make our gardens pretty every day. In so many ways, more uses than you probably think. So now you know more about H2O. It's not enough to just sit back and let it flow. So please be grateful the next time you open that tap. Now that you know more about H2O. Thank you.